She was standing in my living room in my house, drinking wine I had poured for her, and she had no idea that I understood every single word coming out of her mouth. I looked her straight in the eyes, no smile, no hesitation, and I said, in perfect Russian, calm as a woman checking the weather, Dva месяца, интересный срок. Я думала о другом. 2 months is an interesting timeline. I had something else in mind. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Something shifted behind her eyes, not panic, recognition. The particular kind of recognition that belongs to someone who has just understood fully and completely that they have made a mistake they cannot take back. My husband put his glass down. His face went the color of something that had never seen sunlight. I turned to him and said, in English, the same way I would ask if we needed more coffee, "Honey, you want some dessert?" Then I walked into the kitchen, steady, no rush. I did not look back. My name is Nora Calloway. I am 62 years old. I am a clinical pharmacist at Vanderbilt University Medical Center in Nashville, Tennessee. I have spent 36 years learning how to read what medication does not say out loud. Hidden compounds, cross reactions, dosages off by a fraction of a milligram that most people would never catch. I never thought that skill set would save my life until the fall of 2024. If you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments. And please stay with me until the end. Let me take you back to what ordinary looked like, because ordinary is always where these things begin, not in some dramatic confrontation, not in a moment you can point to and say, that is where it started. It begins in the middle of a Tuesday, in a kitchen that smells like coffee, in a marriage that looks from the outside completely fine. Garrett Winslow and I got married in the spring of 2018 after 14 months of dating. He was 46 when this story takes place. Tall, well-dressed, the kind of man who knows how to make a room feel settled just by walking into it. That was the first thing I noticed about him when we met at a fundraiser for the Children's Hospital. The way the energy in the room seemed to organize itself around him. Calm, deliberate, safe. I am a person who notices things. It is literally my job. And what I noticed about Garrett early on was that he never wasted a word. He said what he meant, or so I believed, and he did not perform warmth the way some people do, throwing it around like confetti. His warmth was measured, specific. It felt earned. I should have understood much earlier that measured and specific also describes a man who has thought carefully about what he wants you to see. We did not have children. That was a conversation we had honestly and without resentment about 2 years into the marriage. I had grown children from my first marriage, scattered across the country, living their own full lives. Garrett understood that. He said he did anyway. We had a house in a quiet neighborhood in West Nashville. We had routines that fit together the way two people's lives do when they have made a genuine effort to build something together. He made coffee on weekends. I handled the grocery list. He traveled for work sometimes 2 or 3 days at a stretch. And I did not mind because I had a career that demanded my film and a life outside our marriage that felt complete on its own terms. By the time fall of 2024 arrived, we had been married 6 years. The marriage was not unhappy. It was also not the thing I had believed it was when I stood in that ceremony at 56 years old and meant every word I said. It had become something quieter, something that functioned. I told myself that was normal, that people of our age traded the early fire for something more durable and more practical. I was wrong about what I was actually describing, but I did not know that yet. Before I go any further, let me tell you about something that matters more than anything else in this story. In 2017, almost a year before I ever met Garrett Winslow, I filed a patent. A pharmaceutical compound I had been developing quietly for 3 years alongside my clinical work. An antimicrobial agent targeting resistant bacterial strains, the kind that had been defeating standard treatment protocols with increasing regularity. The kind of compound that, if it moved through the full development and licensing process, could be worth serious money. Theodore Okafor, an intellectual property attorney in Nashville, handled the filing. By fall of 2024, the patent was in active licensing negotiations with a major pharmaceutical group. The estimated value had reached $4.2 million. Garrett knew about the patent. I had told him about it early in our relationship, the way you share things with someone you are serious about. He had always seemed proud of it, in the low-key supportive way that reads as genuine until you have reason to read it differently. I also need to tell you about something I signed in 2019. A year into our marriage, Garrett brought home a document, a marital property agreement, he called it. Standard stuff, he said. Just something his attorney recommended to make sure our assets were properly organized as we moved forward together. It was 8 pages. I read it the way a person reads the terms and conditions on a software update, looking for the broad strokes, trusting the person who handed it to me. I signed it. That was the only moment in this entire story where I moved too fast. And I want you to hold on to that, because what I eventually learned about that document is something I never saw coming. Now, the vitamins. About 3.5 months before everything I am about to tell you, Garrett started bringing home a bottle of supplements. A general multivitamin, he said. Something he had picked up at the pharmacy near his office because he had noticed I had been skipping breakfast more often and thought it might help with my energy. He put it on the bathroom shelf. He set a tablet beside my glass of water every evening before dinner, the way you might leave a small thoughtful note, a gesture of care. I took them every evening without thinking about it twice. Because I trusted him, because that is what 6 years of marriage does to the part of your brain that is supposed to ask questions. I am a pharmacist. I have been a pharmacist for 36 years. I know what medications look like. I know how they are manufactured, coded, sized, and weighted. I had been taking those supplements for months before the thought even entered my mind to look more closely, because we do not look closely at the things given to us by people we love. That is not weakness. That is just what love asks of us, until something tells you to look. It was a Wednesday evening in early September 2024 when everything changed, though I did not know it was changing at the time. It felt like a Wednesday, ordinary in every visible way. My night shift had been canceled, lower than expected admissions, which happens sometimes, and the charge nurse had called me around 5 to tell me not to come in. I was relieved. I had been running on 5 hours of sleep for most of the week, and the idea of a quiet evening at home felt like a genuine gift. I pulled into the driveway a little before 6. Garrett's car was already there, which was not unusual. I grabbed my bag, unlocked the front door, and stepped inside. I heard his voice from the study. The door was pulled almost shut, just a few inches of gap along the frame. He was on the phone. I could tell from the rhythm of it that he had been in this conversation for a while already, that he was settled into it, comfortable. And then I registered the language. Russian. I stopped walking. I was standing in the hallway, maybe 12 feet from the study door, and my body went still before my brain had fully caught up with what I was hearing. Here is something about me that Garrett knew, but had apparently never thought through carefully enough. From 2009 to 2011, I participated in an international clinical pharmacy exchange program through my graduate institution. 2 years of research and clinical work based in Moscow and St. Petersburg. Total immersion. Classes in Russian, patient consultations in Russian, research documentation in Russian. I was in my late 40s, and I had always been good with languages. I absorbed Russian the way dedicated people absorb things, when they are motivated completely and permanently. Garrett knew I had spent time in Russia. He did not know how much I still remembered. I had never spoken Russian at home. It was a working language from another chapter of my professional life, and it had simply never come up in a way that required me to use it. He assumed. He never verified. And that assumption is the reason I am here to tell this story. I stood in that hallway and I listened. Some of what he said I caught in full sentences. Some came in pieces, the way a language does when you have not actively used it in years, but the comprehension is still there underneath, waiting. The words that landed clearly that I could not mishear or misinterpret were these: Nakaplenia, accumulation, dozirovka, dosage, 2 месяца, 2 months, a name, Svetlana, and then a complete sentence, spoken in the unhurried tone of a man who believes himself to be entirely alone, entirely safe, entirely unheard. Она не поймет, пока не станет слишком поздно. She will not understand until it is too late. He laughed after that. A small laugh, easy and unguarded, the laugh of someone in the middle of a conversation they are enjoying. I had not heard Garrett laugh like that in a long time. I stood in that hallway for about 90 seconds. Then I walked quietly into the kitchen, set my bag down on the counter, and opened the refrigerator. Not because I wanted anything from it, because I needed something to do with my hands that looked like a person coming home from work. 20 minutes later, Garrett came out of the study. He kissed me on the cheek and asked how my day was. I told him about a patient case, a complicated medication adjustment I had been working through with the attending physician that afternoon. I gave him enough detail that the answer sounded real because it was real. He nodded and said that sounded complicated. Then he asked what I wanted for dinner. Said I was thinking pasta. He said that sounded good. We made dinner together in our kitchen like two people who were exactly what they appeared to be. That night, I waited until his breathing steadied beside me in the dark. Then I took my personal phone, the one with the passcode Garrett did not know, and I went into the bathroom and sat down on the floor with my back against the wall. I opened a notes app and I typed every word I had heard, the Russian first, written out as carefully as I could. Then the English translations beside each phrase. Then the name. Then a description of the laugh, because I understood even then that details like that one matter. The ease of it. What that ease tells you about a person who does not know they are being observed. I noted the date, the time, everything I could remember. Then I sat there on that bathroom floor for a while longer. I want to be honest about what that felt like, because I think the honest version is more useful than the version where I tell you I was immediately sharp and decisive and unafraid. The truth is that for a few minutes on that bathroom floor, I just sat with it, the weight of what those words might mean. Accumulation, dosage, 2 months. The name I had never heard him say before, and that laugh. I looked up at the bathroom shelf, at the bottle of vitamins sitting there in its ordinary way, label forward, cap tight, exactly where it always was. I am a pharmacist with 36 years of clinical experience. I know what those words belong to. Accumulation, dosage, 2 months. Coming from a real estate investor on a phone call he did not know his wife was hearing, those words do not have an innocent home. I did not touch the bottle. I turned off the bathroom light and went back to bed. And I decided in the dark, lying beside a man I had loved and cooked for and trusted for 6 years, that I was not going to say a single word until I understood exactly what I was dealing with. Because here is what 36 years of clinical pharmacy teaches you above everything else. You do not act on a hypothesis. You test it first. You collect the data. You verify before you move. And I was about to start collecting. Thursday morning, Garrett left for his office at 8 o'clock, the same way he left every Thursday, with his travel mug and his laptop bag, and a kiss on my forehead that I received with the same expression I had been wearing for 6 years. The door closed behind him. I heard his car back out of the driveway. I waited until the sound of the engine had fully disappeared down the street. Then I went to the bathroom. I did not touch the vitamin bottle with my hands. I want you to understand that clearly, because the way you handle something in those first moments determines whether it can ever be used as evidence. And I was already thinking about evidence even before I had fully put into words what I was building evidence for. That is what 36 years of clinical work does to the way your mind operates. It makes you think in chains, cause and effect, action and documentation. You do not just observe, you preserve. I opened the cabinet under the sink and took out a pair of nitrile gloves, the thin disposable kind I keep at home, the same way most people keep extra batteries. Routine supplies for someone in my profession for nearly 4 decades. I put them on. Then I took a pair of fine-tipped medical tweezers from my personal kit and carefully lifted one tablet from the bottom of the vitamin bottle, not from the top. From the bottom, where the absence would be least visible to someone checking the fill level without removing the cap fully. I placed the tablet into a specimen collection container, the small sealed type with a screw top and a label field on the side, the kind used routinely in clinical settings. I wrote on the label in my own hand the date, the time, a description of the source. I sealed the container and placed it inside a clean zip bag in my work bag. Then I took one of my own vitamins from a bottle I had purchased the previous year at a pharmacy on the other side of Nashville, a pharmacy Garrett had no reason to know about and had never visited with me. The tablet was the same approximate size and color as the one I had just removed. I placed it at the bottom of his bottle, pressed the cap back on, set the bottle back on the shelf at the same angle, the same distance from the edge, the same position relative to the soap dispenser beside it. I pulled off the gloves and put them in my bag as well. The whole process took less than 4 minutes. During my lunch break that day, I drove to a shipping store 2 miles from the hospital and sent the sealed specimen container to Farm Verify Laboratories, a private pharmaceutical analysis company based in Tennessee. They are state certified and federally accredited, which matters for reasons I already understood. Their chain of custody documentation, meaning the complete recorded record of exactly where a sample has been and who has handled it at every stage, meets the standards required for legal proceedings. When you submit a sample to Farm Verify, every step of that sample's journey is logged and given a timestamp from the moment it arrives at their facility to the moment this is also by their laboratory director. I paid out of pocket. I used my personal bank card, not the joint account. I kept the receipt, the tracking number, and a photograph of the sealed package before I handed it over the counter. I noted the time of submission on my phone. This is what it looks like when a pharmacist with 36 years of experience decides to investigate something. Not dramatic, not emotional, methodical in the way that only becomes possible when you have spent the better part of 4 decades understanding that the difference between a result you can use and a result you cannot is almost always a matter of procedure. I went back to work and finished my shift. That evening, I sat across from Garrett at our kitchen table and ate the dinner he had ordered from the Thai place on Charlotte Avenue that we both liked. And I talked about a training seminar I was considering, and I asked him how his afternoon had gone, and he told me about a property negotiation that was moving slower than he wanted. Normal conversation. The kind that fills space without requiring either person to feel fully present in it. That night, after he fell asleep, I pulled up my medical records on my phone. My own records. 3 months of them. I read them the way I would read a chart for a patient I had never met, without the context of knowing how I had felt on each of those days, without the explanations I had given myself at the time, just the data, standing on its own. What I found when I looked at it that way was a pattern I had been explaining away one incident at a time, but had never seen assembled all together. Fatigue that I had put down to a difficult stretch at work, and the ordinary tiredness of a woman in her 60s managing a demanding career. 2 evenings of mild nausea I had connected to eating too late, and most significantly, a routine liver panel from August in which my alt enzyme level, one of the markers that indicates how well the liver is functioning, had come back slightly elevated. My doctor had noted it in the chart with the phrase monitoring recommended possible age-related fluctuation, and I had accepted that completely because it was the assessment of someone I trusted who had no reason to think otherwise. Looked at separately, each of those things was explainable. Looked at together, over the timeline of the past 3 months, they formed something that pharmacists who experience recognizes immediately. Not proof, not yet, but a pattern that a certain category of compound would produce in a body being exposed to it consistently over time. A compound designed not to announce itself, designed to build up slowly. Nacoplania. I closed my records and put my phone face down on the nightstand. I did not sleep much that night either. 5 days after I submitted the sample, the results came back. It was a Thursday morning. I was on my way into the hospital, stopped at a red light on West End Avenue, when my personal phone buzzed with an email notification from Farm Verify. I did not open it at the light. I drove the rest of the way to Vanderbilt, parked in the garage on level 3, and turned off the engine. Then I opened the email. The laboratory director's report was 4 pages. I read all 4 of them slowly, in the front seat of my car with the engine off and the garage as quiet around me. The tablet I had submitted was not consistent with the labeled product. The coating did not match the manufacturer's standard formulation. More significantly, the analysis identified a synthetic compound not present in any commercially available multivitamin, a substance that damages the liver over time. It's not in a sudden or dramatic way, but slowly and cumulatively, affecting liver enzyme levels in a way that would look on a standard blood panel like a stress response or a flare of an age-related condition. The kind of finding that a doctor would note and monitor. The kind of finding that would not, on its own, raise immediate alarm. The kind of finding that, given enough time and consistent exposure, would eventually lead to serious liver failure in a way that could look, to anyone examining it afterward, like natural deterioration in a woman of 62. The report was signed. It had a certification number. It had the full chain of custody record attached, every timestamp from the moment the package was received to the moment the analysis was completed. It was, in every legal and scientific sense, a document that could be used. I set my phone down on the passenger seat, and then I cried, not loudly. Not the kind of crying that overtakes you and makes everything stop. The quiet kind where the tears come before you have made any decision to let them, because your body understands the truth. A few seconds before the part of you that is still trying to organize it into something manageable. 4 minutes. I know because I checked the time when it started and checked it again when I wiped my face and reached for the door handle. 4 minutes to feel the full weight of what that report meant. That the man who had been placing a tablet beside my water glass every evening for 3 months, who had kissed my forehead and asked about my day and ordered Thai food from the place we both liked, had been doing something to me that he intended for me not to survive. That he had looked at a 62-year-old woman with a demanding career and an existing liver panel that showed minor fluctuation and thought the story would write itself. Then I got out of the car. I walked into the hospital. I clocked in at 7:58 and started my shift 2 minutes early. Because the other thing 36 years of clinical work teaches you is that your feelings are real and they deserve space, but there is a time for that space, and it is not in the middle of what needs to be done. I had work to do. The next phase of what I built happened in the evenings, on a laptop I kept in my locker at the hospital rather than at home, using a login that had nothing to do with any account Garrett could access. I started with what was publicly available, because public records are where you begin when you want a foundation that cannot be disputed. Tennessee business entity filings, New York State corporate registrations, real estate transaction databases. I typed Garrett's name into the first search and worked outward from there, the way you work through a complex medication interaction after 36 years. Start with what you know. Follow every connection. Do not stop at the ones that seem unimportant. What I found did not arrive all at once. It built, one document referencing another, one filing pointing to a name that pointed to a company that pointed back to a name I recognized. The name was S. Voss. It appeared in 2 limited liability companies, both connected to Garrett's real estate investment network. One had been established in 2021, the other in 2023. In every shared document, the co-owner was listed as S. Voss with a New York address. Garrett had been using just the initial in all their shared paperwork. I had never had any reason to look at those filings before. I had never had any reason to look for that name. I cross-referenced the New York address with corporate registration records and found the full name, Svetlana Voss, the same name I had heard through the study door 3 weeks earlier. She was not a casual contact. She was structurally embedded in 2 of Garrett's companies, had been for 3 years, and he had kept her existence completely invisible from everything we shared. I added everything to an encrypted folder I kept on the hospital laptop. Printed copies went into a physical file. I locked in my personal cabinet in the staff pharmacy office, a space Garrett had never entered and had no reason to. Then I called Theodore Okafor. I kept the conversation professional. I told him I was following up on the licensing timeline and wanted to make sure everything on the patent documentation was current. He walked me through the status, which was normal, and then paused in the way that people pause when they are deciding whether to add something. He added something. He told me that approximately 3 weeks earlier, his office had received an inquiry from a law firm in Atlanta. They had identified themselves as representing a pharmaceutical investment group interested in licensing discussions. Theodore had responded that all contact regarding the patent needed to go through me directly. He had not mentioned it to me at the time because he assumed it was a routine approach from a prospective licensing party. I asked him the name of the Atlanta firm. He told me. I thanked him, told him to send me any future inquiries immediately, regardless of how routine they seemed, and ended the call. That evening, I searched the Atlanta firm's name in the same databases I had been working through all week. The firm had represented Garrett in a commercial real estate transaction in 2022, a property purchase in Atlanta. This firm was not a stranger to Garrett's business world, it was part of it. A law firm connected to Garrett had approached my patent attorney, presenting itself as an independent party, 3 weeks before Svetlana Voss was scheduled to come to Nashville. I sat with that for a long time. What I was looking at was not coincidence, it was a structure. Someone had built it carefully over years, and I was only now seeing the shape of it because I had finally started looking from the right angle. I printed everything, added it to the folder, locked the cabinet. The days between that discovery and the following Monday moved slowly. I went to work. I came home. I watched and I waited. I gave Garrett nothing in my manner or my expression that suggested anything had changed, because nothing in my visible life had changed. I was still the same woman he sat across from at dinner every evening. I was just not the woman he thought I was anymore. And then on Monday, he handed me exactly what I needed next, without knowing it, without any idea at all. Monday evening, Garrett came home at his usual time, set his laptop bag by the door, and sat down across from me at the kitchen table with the ease of a man who believes everything around him is going according to plan. We were halfway through dinner when he put his fork down and mentioned, in the tone people use for things they want to appear unimportant, that he had a colleague coming to Nashville later that week. A financial consultant, he said, someone he had been working with on a project. She was flying in from New York, and he thought it would be nice to have her over for dinner on Friday rather than taking her to a restaurant. More personal, he said. More relaxed. Her name was Svetlana Voss. I looked at him across the table. The same face I had been looking at for 6 years. The same measured warmth, the same easy confidence, the same complete absence of any indication that he had just handed me exactly what I had been waiting for. That sounds nice, I said. I'll cook. He smiled, grateful, unhurried. The smile of a man whose evening was going the way he expected. I picked up my fork and continued eating. What Garrett did not know was that the moment he said that name out loud in my kitchen, something shifted in what I was building. Up until that point, I had documents and lab results and a chain of connections and a recording of his voice through a door, speaking a language he did not know I understood. What I did not yet have was his voice, clearly in a space I controlled, saying something that could not be explained away. He was about to give me that. In my own home, at a dinner table he had asked me to sit. I want to say something about the recording, because I know it is the part some people will wonder about. Tennessee is a one-party consent state. That means that any participant in a conversation can legally record that conversation without notifying the other people present. I was not planning to hide and secretly capture someone else's private exchange. I was going to be present. I was going to be a participant. The dinner was happening in my house, at my table, with food I was preparing. Every word spoken under that roof on Friday evening would be spoken in a space where I had every legal right to document what occurred. I had confirmed this in writing before I took any action. On Thursday evening, after Garrett had gone to bed, I set up the recording device. Not my phone, but a small dedicated digital recorder I had purchased 2 weeks earlier from an electronics store across town. It had a 12-hour battery and a microphone sensitive enough to pick up clear audio from anywhere in the room. I placed it inside the decorative wooden box on the shelf beside the fireplace, the one that held spare candles and had never been opened by anyone but me. The microphone faced outward through a small gap in the lid. I tested it twice. The audio was clean. Every word spoken in the living room and the connected dining area came through clearly. I went to bed. Friday afternoon, I spent cooking. A proper meal, the kind that signals genuine effort and welcome. Roasted chicken with herbs from the small garden we had planted together 2 springs ago. Roasted vegetables. A good bottle of wine opened and left to breathe on the counter. I set the table with the nicer dishes. I put out cloth napkins. I did everything that a gracious wife would do for her husband's visiting colleague, and I did it all without a single thing in my face or my body or my movements that would have told anyone in that house what I was actually doing. Svetlana Voss arrived at 7. She was younger than I had pictured, late 30s, with the kind of composed and self-contained energy that reads as professional competence until you understand it as something else entirely. She had dark hair pulled back. She dressed the way people dress, when they want to communicate seriousness without appearing to try. She shook my hand and said my home was lovely, the way people say things they have said many times before, politely and without particularly meaning them. I thanked her and offered her a glass of wine. She accepted. She held the glass by the stem. I noticed that. Dinner moved the way these evenings move, when everyone at the table is performing something. Garrett was warm and expansive, the version of himself he brought to professional social settings. Svetlana was precise and appropriately engaged. She asked me about my work at the hospital with exactly the right amount of interest, not too much and not too little. The way someone inquires about a thing they have already decided is not relevant to them. I answered her questions. I asked her a few of my own. I refilled her wine glass and offered seconds on the chicken and cleared plates at the right moments and said all the things that a woman hosting dinner in her own home would say. I was also listening to everything, not just the words, the pauses between them, the moments when Garrett glanced at Svetlana and then quickly away, the way her attention moved to him when she thought I was looking down at my plate. The texture of their interaction, which was not the texture of two people who had been working together on a business project for a couple of years. It was something more settled than that, more habitual. These were two people who knew each other in a way that had nothing to do with the explanation sitting on the surface of the evening. After the main course, I stood up to bring out dessert, fresh fruit and a simple cake I had made that afternoon. I carried the dinner plates into the kitchen and took a moment to arrange everything on the serving plate. The kitchen and the dining area were separated by a half wall, open plan, the kind that was popular when the house was renovated before we bought it. From where I stood at the counter, I was out of their direct line of sight, but I could hear everything in that room as clearly as if I were sitting at the table with them. They switched to Russian before I had finished arranging the plates. It was not hesitant. It was not a gradual drift into another language the way it happens when two native speakers forget themselves in conversation. It was deliberate, a shift made by two people who had agreed at some point before that evening that this was how they would speak when they needed to speak freely, when they believed no one around them could follow. I set down the serving spoon. Garrett spoke first, licensing agreement, signature, the name of the Atlanta law firm, spoken as a casual reference between people who had discussed it many times before. And then, clearly, without softening, "К тому времени она уже не сможет оспорить." By that point, she will no longer be able to contest it. Svetlana responded in the measured tone of someone reviewing a timeline they have already gone over more than once. "Два месяца достаточно по твоему плану? 2 months enough according to your plan? Garrett, анализы печени в прошлом месяце уже работают на нас. Ее врач смотрит в другую сторону. The liver results from last month are already working in our favor. Her doctor is looking in the wrong direction." I stood at the kitchen counter with both hands flat on the cold granite surface. I want to be precise about what I felt in that moment, because precision matters more than drama when you are describing something this specific. It was not shock. I had moved past shock 5 days earlier in a parking garage, reading a laboratory report in my front seat. What I felt standing at that counter was something colder and more clarifying. It was confirmation, the particular sensation of a hypothesis becoming a fact, which in clinical work is never triumphant, because facts of that kind always cost something. My husband was telling his business partner, in the language he believed I did not speak, that my liver results were supporting his narrative, that my own doctor was looking in the wrong direction, that within 2 months I would not be in a position to contest what he was planning to do with my patent. He had chosen a 62-year-old woman with a slightly elevated liver panel, and he had calculated that the story would be believed. Age-related deterioration, natural causes, nothing to investigate. He was telling her these things in my house, at my table, while I was in the next room arranging fruit on a plate. I picked up the dessert. I walked back to the dining room. I set it on the table and sat down and said that I hoped everyone still had room and that the cake was a simple one, but I thought it had turned out well. Svetlana said it looked wonderful. Garrett said it looked great, babe. We had dessert. 20 minutes later, the evening was winding down. Garrett went to the front closet to get Svetlana's coat, which left the two of us standing in the living room a few feet apart, in the particular quiet that falls when a third person has temporarily stepped out of a space. I looked at her, not with hostility, not with the energy of someone about to do something that will surprise her. I looked at her the way I look at a laboratory result I have been waiting on, directly, without any performance at all. And I said, in Russian quietly, the same way I would read a finding out loud to confirm it, Dva месяца, интересный срок. Я думала о другом. 2 months is an interesting timeline. I had something else in mind. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. I watched it happen behind her eyes. Not panic, because a woman like Svetlana Voss does not panic in ways you can see. But something moved. Something that had been in one position shifted to another, and once a thing shifts like that, it does not shift back. She had spent this entire evening believing she was in a room with a 62-year-old woman who did not understand what was happening around her. In 3 seconds, that belief was gone, and she was standing in a house that now meant something completely different than it had meant 30 seconds ago. Garrett came back into the room with her coat. He looked at Svetlana, then he looked at me. He had not heard what I said. He had only walked into the quality of the silence that followed it, and that quality was enough to tell him that something had changed in a way he had not planned for. His face did the thing that faces do when the structure holding them up has just been quietly compromised. Not a collapse, something more internal, a stillness that started somewhere behind his eyes and moved outward. I turned to him, same voice, same tone. Honey, you want some dessert? There's still cake. Then I walked back into the kitchen. I ran the water and began washing the dinner dishes. Behind me, I heard the low sounds of a departure being organized. Coat, handbag, a brief exchange at the door. Garrett's voice finding its smooth surface even when everything underneath it was no longer smooth. The front door opened and closed. The recorder in the wooden box beside the fireplace had been running for 3 hours and 40 minutes. I kept washing dishes. Garrett came into the kitchen a few minutes later and stood near the counter. I could feel him trying to read me, trying to determine what I knew and how much. He wanted to find a version of what had just happened at that door that he could explain away. I handed him a dish to dry without looking up. She seems nice, I said. Good to finally put a face to a name. He dried the dish. He said, yeah, she was easy to work with. I said that was good. We finished the dishes and I said I was tired and I went to bed. In the dark, I lay completely still and thought about the word Garrett had used. Osporit, contest. The specific legal meaning of that word in Russian, which does not mean argue or disagree in a casual sense. It means to formally challenge something in a legal proceeding. To dispute in front of a court. He had not been talking about a conversation. He had been talking about a process he expected to happen after I was no longer present to participate in it. I thought about that word for a long time. Then I thought about the morning, about who I needed to call and how quickly I needed to move. I had the recording. I had the lab results. I had the documents. I had the connection between Garrett and Svetlana and the Atlanta firm and my patent. What I needed now was someone who understood how to take all of that and build it into something that could not be dismantled. I knew exactly who to call. I just needed to get to morning first. Audrey Blaylock's office was on the 11th floor of a building on Courthouse Square in downtown Nashville. Clean lines, minimal decoration, the kind of space that communicates that the person inside it does not spend time on things that do not matter. I had gotten her name from a colleague at the hospital whose divorce 3 years earlier had been, in her words, the most efficiently handled painful experience of her life. That was the recommendation I was looking for. I called on Saturday morning, 2 days after the dinner, from my car in the hospital parking garage, not from home. Audrey's assistant put me through within 20 minutes, and I told her I needed an appointment as soon as possible and that the matter was urgent in ways I would prefer to explain in person. She scheduled me for Monday at 9. I spent the weekend behaving exactly as I had been behaving for the past 6 weeks. I made coffee. I did laundry. I sat with Garrett on Sunday afternoon and watched a football game that neither of us was particularly invested in. I asked him about a property deal he had mentioned earlier in the week and listened to his answer with the attentiveness of a woman who was interested in her husband's work. He was watching me. I could feel it in the particular quality of his attention, which had shifted since Friday evening, in ways that were subtle enough that someone who had not been studying him closely would have missed entirely. He was trying to determine what I knew. He was trying to figure out whether what had happened at the door with Svetlana was what it appeared to be. I gave him nothing to work with. I was warm and ordinary and completely unreadable. And by Sunday night, I could see the tension in him beginning to settle back toward his usual baseline. He was deciding that he had misread the moment, that I had perhaps picked up a word or two somewhere and repeated something that sounded more knowing than it was, that I had not truly understood. People believe what they need to believe. It is one of the most reliable things about human nature, and I was counting on it. Monday morning, I sat down across from Audrey Blaylock and opened my folder. I laid everything out in sequence, the way I would present a complex case to a physician after 36 years of doing exactly that. Not all at once. In order, each piece building on the one before it, so that by the time she reached the last document, she had the full picture rather than a pile of disconnected information. First, the notes from the hallway. The date, the time, the Russian phrases, the translation, the description of the laugh. Second, the Farm Verify report, the certificate number, the full chain of custody record, the laboratory director's signature, the identification of the compound that was damaging. Third, my medical records from the previous 3 months, with the elevated liver enzyme result and the timeline mapped against the period of supplement use. Fourth, the LLC filings showing Voss, 2 companies, 2021 and 2023, the New York address, the structural connection to Garrett's business network. Fifth, the email exchange with Theodore Okafor about the Atlanta firm. Sixth, the documentation connecting that firm to Garrett's 2022 real estate transaction. Seventh, the recording from Friday evening. And eighth, a written transcript of the Russian conversation prepared by me, with each phrase in its original language, followed by my English translation, and a note at the top identifying my professional background and the 2 years of clinical research I had conducted in Russia. Audrey read without interrupting. She read the Farm Verif report twice. When she reached the transcript, she slowed down further, moving through it with the careful attention of someone who understands that the words on a page are going to matter in ways that extend beyond this room. Then she pressed play on the recording. She listened to the full length without moving, the ambient sounds of a dinner party, cutlery, and conversation, and the ordinary texture of an evening that was not ordinary at all. And then clearly the shift into Russian, Garrett's voice, the words from the transcript now audible. When it finished, she set her pen down. She looked at me and said that if the evidence held under further review, what I had brought her went considerably beyond a divorce matter. I told her I understood that. She asked me one question. She asked whether I had changed anything in my behavior at home since the dinner on Friday. I told her I had not changed a single thing. She nodded, slowly the nod of someone reassessing what they initially assumed they were dealing with. Then she told me what I was not to do. I was not to confront Garrett. I was not to remove any documents from the house. I was not to contact Svetlana Voss directly or make any approach to the Atlanta law firm. I was not to alter my routine in any way that might signal to Garrett that something had shifted. I told her I already knew all of that. She looked at me for a moment and said she believed me. Then she told me she needed to make a call that afternoon to a contact at the FBI field office in Nashville. I asked her why federal rather than local. She explained it simply. Svetlana Voss was based in New York. The two LLC entities operated across state lines. The financial transactions connected to the patent approach involved phone and email communications crossing state lines, which places them under federal jurisdiction. Nashville local police could be involved, but the lead authority would be federal. The agent she had in mind was named Darlene Quist. She handled financial crimes and fraud cases involving multiple states. Audrey had worked alongside her on two previous matters and described her as someone who read documents the way a surgeon reads a scan. Thorough, precise, not interested in anything she could not substantiate fully. I said that sounded like exactly the right person. Audrey said she would be in touch by the end of the week. I picked up my folder, stood to leave, and she stopped me with one more question. She asked if I was doing all right. It was the first time anyone had asked me that in 6 weeks, and I want to be honest about what it felt like to hear it. Not sentimental. More like the sensation of putting down something heavy that you have been carrying so long you stopped noticing the weight. I told her I was managing. She said that managing was enough for right now, and that I should call her if anything changed at home before we spoke again. I thanked her and walked out into the Nashville morning. 2 days later, Audrey called me back. Theodore Okafor had reviewed the 2019 marital property agreement at her request. He had spent 3 days on it, cross-referencing the specific language against Tennessee intellectual property law, and his conclusion was one I had not fully anticipated. The clause Garrett had constructed, the one designed to establish a pathway for transferring control of the patent through the marital framework, was not legally valid, had never been legally valid. Tennessee law regarding intellectual property created before a marriage is specific and clear. A prenuptial agreement addressing premarital intellectual property must be executed before the marriage, with independent notarization for both parties, as a standalone document. It cannot be embedded in a postmarital property agreement as a supplementary clause, regardless of how that clause is worded or how carefully it has been drafted. The attorney Garrett had used to prepare the 2019 document had either not known this or had not told him. Either way, the result was the same. The legal mechanism Garrett had spent 5 years carefully building was constructed on a foundation that Tennessee law did not recognize. My patent could not have been taken from me that way. Not through that document, not through that structure. Even if everything else in his plan had proceeded exactly as he intended, the legal transfer he was counting on would have collapsed the moment it faced any serious legal scrutiny. I sat with that information in Audrey's office for a long moment. I thought about the 5 years of careful construction, the LLC entities, the Atlanta law firm, the approach to Theodore's office, the compound in the vitamins, the narrative being built around my liver results, designed to look like the natural decline of a woman in her 60s. 5 years of architecture, and the foundation of it had been wrong from the very beginning. I asked Theodore, who had joined us by phone, whether Garrett would have known. Theodore said it was unlikely. The error was specific to Tennessee intellectual property law in a way that a general practice real estate attorney would easily miss. Garrett had trusted someone who did not know what they did not know. I said I understood. I thanked him and he signed off. Audrey and I sat quietly for a moment. Then she told me that Agent Quist had reviewed the initial materials and confirmed there was sufficient basis to open a formal investigation. The next phase would involve a comprehensive review of Garrett's financial records, the LLC transaction histories, and the communications connected to the Atlanta firm. That process would take several weeks. When it reached the point where action could be taken, she would give me advance notice. She told me to go home and continue exactly as I had been. I told her that was not a problem. It was about 10 days after that conversation that I had lunch with Priscilla Vane. Priscilla had been my closest friend at Vanderbilt for going on 8 years. We ate in the hospital cafeteria on a Tuesday, the way we did most Tuesdays when our schedules lined up. She was the kind of person who said exactly what she thought and expected the same in return, which made her restful to be around in the way that genuinely honest people always are. We talked about a new treatment protocol the infectious disease team was trialing. We talked about a scheduling change in the pharmacy department that neither of us was happy about. Ordinary Tuesday conversation. Near the end of the meal, she put her coffee cup down and looked at the table rather than at me. She said there was something she had been meaning to tell me for a while, and that she had kept finding reasons to put it off, and she did not want to put it off any longer. I set my fork down. About 2 months earlier, she said, Garrett had called her. He had said he was concerned about my health and wanted to better understand something. He had asked her specifically how elevated liver enzymes typically present in a clinical situation when the underlying cause is an inflammatory or age-related condition. He had asked about the usual timeline of progression. He had asked whether that kind of finding on a standard blood panel would typically prompt immediate medical concern, or whether it was the kind of result that gets watched over time without significant alarm in a patient of my age. Priscilla had answered him fully and honestly. She had thought he was a worried husband, trying to understand his wife's health situation better. She had given him a thorough and accurate explanation, because that was what she believed he needed. She looked up at me then. Her face had the particular expression of someone who has understood too late to have done anything differently that they were used. She said she was sorry. She said she should have mentioned it to me at the time, and she did not know why she had not, except that it had seemed like a private thing between a husband and a wife, and she had not wanted to intrude on that. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. I told her she had done nothing wrong. I told her she had no reason to think anything other than what she had thought. I told her I was not angry, and that I meant every word of that. She nodded. She did not look entirely convinced, but she accepted it. What Garrett had done was not complicated once you understood it. He had gathered precise clinical information from a trusted source in order to build a medical narrative. He wanted to know exactly how my liver results would appear to a physician, exactly what a doctor would conclude when they saw the numbers, exactly how much time he had before that picture prompted a different kind of investigation altogether. He had specifically asked about patients of my age, knowing that age-related explanations would make the story easier to believe. He had used Priscilla to calibrate his timeline. Agent Darlene Quist, when she later reviewed the full case, called it the most calculated element of the entire plan. A man who had thought through not just the method but the cover story, who had built in advance a medical explanation for what he intended to cause in a 62-year-old woman whose body would make the story plausible. He had been almost perfect. Almost. 3 weeks after my lunch with Priscilla, Audrey called me on a Thursday evening and told me the investigation had reached the point where action could be taken. Agent Quist's team had completed their analysis of the financial records and the transaction histories across the LLC entities. The pattern of communications connected to the Atlanta firm had been fully documented. The evidence was sufficient. The warrant would be executed on Tuesday morning. She told me to make sure I was not at home when it happened. She told me to be somewhere calm, somewhere I could be reached. She told me not to do anything on Monday evening or Tuesday morning that might give Garrett any reason to think something was coming. I told her I understood. Monday evening I made dinner, and we ate together, and I asked about his week, and he told me, and I told him about mine. I went to bed at the usual time. I set my alarm for 5:45. Tuesday morning, I was out of the house by 6:30, the same way I left every Tuesday. My bag had been packed gradually over the previous 3 days, 1 or 2 items at a time, nothing taken from its usual place in any way that left a visible gap. A woman who has spent 6 weeks managing every visible detail of her daily life knows how to prepare to leave without disturbing the performance. I kissed Garrett on the cheek. He was half asleep, reaching for his phone before he had fully opened his eyes. I told him I had an early case review. I told him not to wait on dinner. He made a sound that meant okay. I drove to the hospital on my usual route at my usual time. I parked on level 3. I walked to my office, made coffee, and sat down with a stack of patient records that needed review before morning rounds. At 8:17, federal agents and Nashville Metro officers executed the search warrant on Garrett Winslow's office in Midtown Nashville. Simultaneously, the financial accounts connected to both LLC entities were frozen pending investigation. At 8:31, Garrett called my phone. I watched his name on the screen. At 8:44, he called again. At 9:02, he called a third time. I picked up. I told him I was at the hospital. I told him everything seemed fine on my end. I asked him if something was wrong. 3 seconds of silence. He said no. He said he just wanted to hear my voice. I said that was sweet. I told him I had to get back to my work and I would see him tonight. I hung up. I turned my phone face down on the desk. I picked up the first patient record and began reading. Priscilla knocked on my open office door about 20 minutes later. She looked at me once, reading whatever she needed to read in my face. Then she held up 2 coffee cups and raised her eyebrows. I nodded. She came in and set 1 cup on my desk and sat down in the chair across from me and opened a journal she had been meaning to catch up on. We sat like that for a while, the 2 of us working in the same room without needing to discuss why it felt important that morning not to be alone. At 11:47, my phone lit up with a message from Audrey Blaylock. 2 words, done, call me. I set down my pen. I looked out the window of my office at Nashville, spread out below. Gray sky, familiar skyline, the city going about its Tuesday morning with complete indifference to what had just happened inside it. I breathed out. It was the first full exhale I had managed in 6 weeks, and I sat with it for a moment before I reached for the phone. Because some things deserve at least that much. A breath, a pause. One unguarded moment before the next thing begins. I had started this with a conversation I was never supposed to hear. I had built it one timestamp, one document, one locked cabinet at a time. And now other people, people with federal authority and the full weight of the legal system behind them, were carrying it forward. My part, the part that only I could do, was finished. The rest was already in motion. The collapse of Garrett Winslow's professional world did not arrive with sirens or headlines or any of the noise that people associate with things falling apart. It arrived in the language of formal correspondence, in emails with 2 sentences and no elaboration, in phone calls that stopped being returned, in the particular silence that fills a space when the people who used to occupy it have quietly decided they no longer will. The first indication came 8 days after the warrant was executed. Garrett received an email from the Nashville Commercial Real Estate Association informing him that his membership was being placed in inactive status pending resolution of a personal matter. 2 sentences. The language was considerate in tone, the way institutional language always is when an organization is protecting itself while trying to appear gracious. I read it because Garrett, in the disorientation of those first days, had left his email open on the kitchen laptop without thinking. I read it twice. Then I closed the tab and went back to what I had been doing. The second indication came from his largest business partner, a man he had worked alongside for years. A formal letter delivered through their shared attorney describing a suspension of their joint venture activities pending review of certain matters currently under investigation. The phrasing was careful and measured and designed to leave open the possibility of future resumption. It was not leaving open the possibility of resumption. I recognized that as soon as I read it, because I have spent enough of my professional life reading documents that are trying to say one thing while meaning another. The language of a permanent ending dressed as a temporary pause has a specific texture, and that texture was present in every line of that letter. 9 years. Gone in a paragraph that used the word pending 3 times. Svetlana Voss retained separate legal counsel in New York within 2 weeks of the warrant. She and Garrett no longer shared legal representation. Audrey explained to me what that meant in practical terms. It did not mean Svetlana was cooperating with federal investigators in any way that would directly help the prosecution. What it meant was that she had made a calculation about her own exposure and had decided that her best position was one that did not require her to coordinate her story with Garrett's. Whatever account Garrett intended to give, he would now be giving it alone, and an account that requires two people to hold it up does not hold up well when only one person is available to carry it. The Atlanta woman, whose name had first appeared in Theodore's inbox, and then in Garrett's transaction records, and then in the federal investigative file, was formally identified in the charging documents as an intermediary in the conspiracy to fraudulently transfer intellectual property rights through a misrepresented marital agreement. The thread I had first pulled on when Theodore mentioned that inquiry now appeared in an official federal document, fully tied off. Nashville rearranged itself around Garrett's absence the way cities always do, without announcement, without ceremony. The civic board he had sat on for 4 years filled his seat at their next scheduled meeting and did not issue a statement. Two associates who had been regulars in his calendar stopped appearing there. The restaurant where he had a standing Friday reservation quietly stopped holding the table. None of it was dramatic. All of it was permanent. I watched it happen from a distance and documented none of it because there was nothing left that required my documentation. Other people were doing that work now, people with authority and resources I did not have, and my role in this phase was simply to continue going to work each morning like a woman whose life was moving forward. Which, in the ways that actually mattered, it was. The administrative leave came through on a Wednesday morning, 6 weeks after the warrant. I had known it was coming. Audrey had prepared me for it early in the process. Standard hospital protocol, she had explained. Any employee whose name appeared in an active federal investigation, regardless of their role in that investigation, was subject to a mandatory administrative review period. It was not disciplinary. It carried no suggestion of wrongdoing. It was simply the way institutions managed their own position during uncertain periods, 90 days. I signed the paperwork in the office of my department chief, a man I respected and who I could see was uncomfortable with the process in the way that decent people are when a system requires them to do something that feels unfair, even when they understand why it exists. I told him I understood completely and that I would use the time well. He shook my hand and said he looked forward to my return. Priscilla was waiting in the hallway outside. She had taken her lunch break at an unusual hour to be there. She did not say anything when I came out. She just fell into step beside me, and we walked out of the building together into the November afternoon. I moved into her guest room that weekend. It was a small room with a window that faced east and caught the morning light in a way that made it feel larger than it was. Priscilla had put fresh sheets on the bed and left a spare key on the nightstand and said nothing beyond pointing out where she kept the extra coffee and telling me I was welcome to anything in the kitchen. The first week I slept, not in the collapsed way of someone who has given up, but in the deep and necessary way of a body that has been running on controlled reserves for 2 months and has finally been given permission to stop. I slept 9 hours some nights. I woke up without an alarm. I made coffee and sat in the kitchen and watched the backyard through the window and let the quiet be quiet without trying to fill it. It was during the second week that the hardest morning came, not hard in the way the previous 2 months had been hard, which was the hardness of a problem requiring constant management. This was a different kind entirely. I was sitting at Priscilla's kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold, and I was not thinking about evidence or timelines or legal steps or any of the things that had organized my attention for weeks. I was just sitting, and in that stillness, without anything urgent demanding my focus, what arrived was the question I had not yet had to ask myself. 6 years. I had lived alongside this man for 6 years. I had made decisions based on who I believed him to be. I had signed a document I did not read carefully enough because I trusted the person who handed it to me. I had swallowed a tablet every evening for 3 months because he placed it beside my glass and I loved him, and love does not generally come with a quality control procedure. And I had done all of this at 60 years old, an age at which a person believes they have earned the right to trust their own judgment about people. How do you rebuild the part of yourself that decides who to trust? Where do you put that capacity afterward? And how do you make sure it still works? I sat with that question for a long time. I did not have an answer that morning, and I am not sure there is an answer that arrives on any particular schedule. But I sat with it honestly, without trying to resolve it before it was ready. And I think that sitting with it was the beginning of something, even if I could not have told you yet what that something was. After a while, I got up and rinsed my coffee cup and opened my laptop. I started writing, not a journal, a clinical research paper, a formal examination of the detection of certain harmful compounds through standard liver enzyme monitoring, with a specific focus on the gap between what routine blood panels are designed to identify and what they systematically miss, particularly in patients over 60, where age-related explanations can mask deliberate intervention, based on a carefully anonymized case study, structured for submission to a peer-reviewed journal in my field. I wrote for 3 hours that first morning. Then I went for a walk. Then I came back and wrote for 2 more hours. That became the rhythm of the 90 days, writing and walking and sleeping, and occasionally watching something on television with Priscilla in the evenings and not forcing myself to feel anything other than what I actually felt, which changed from day to day and was not always coherent and was sometimes surprisingly ordinary. The paper was submitted on day 78. It was accepted 4 months later. The settlement meeting was held on a Wednesday morning in July 2025, 8 months after the warrant had been executed. A conference room on the third floor of a law office in downtown Nashville. Fluorescent lighting, an air conditioning unit several degrees colder than necessary. A court reporter in the corner, with her hands resting on her machine waiting. Audrey sat beside me. Theodore joined by phone. Garrett came in with his attorney and sat down across the table. I had not seen him since the morning I left the house with my carefully packed bag and told him I had an early case review. 8 months. He was dressed the same way he had always dressed, suit pressed, shoes polished, the external presentation maintained with the discipline of a man who understood that appearance was its own form of argument. But something underneath the presentation had changed. He looked like a building whose internal structure has been compromised. Still standing, still recognizable, but no longer capable of holding the same weight it once did. The criminal proceedings were ongoing and would continue separately from what we were here to resolve today. Attempted murder, criminal fraud, conspiracy to commit wire fraud across state lines. 3 federal charges carrying Garrett's name into a category of language that no amount of professional reputation would retrieve him from. Svetlana Voss faced 2 of the 3 charges in her proceedings in New York. What we were here for today was the civil matter, the marriage, the assets. Garrett's attorney had advised settlement. With an evidentiary record that had only grown stronger over 8 months, there was no terrain left to negotiate. The Farm Verify report, the recording made legally in my own home, the LLC documentation, the Atlanta appearance in the federal charging documents, the account Priscilla had given investigators about the phone call Garrett made to gather clinical information about age-related liver deterioration 2 months before the dinner. Garrett had taken his attorney's advice. The terms were straightforward in the way things become straightforward when one party has nothing left to negotiate with. I received the patent in full. Theodore had prepared documentation confirming its status as premarital intellectual property under Tennessee law, which rendered the 2019 clause entirely without effect. The licensing negotiations, paused during the investigation, would resume. The compound I had spent 3 years developing before I ever met Garrett Winslow remained exactly what it had always been, mine. I received 60% of the jointly held assets. Investment accounts, the real estate holdings that could be valued and divided, the financial instruments accumulated during the marriage. Every dollar of legal fees, Audrey's and Theodore's both, was assigned to Garrett. The house would be sold, with proceeds distributed on terms that reflected the specific circumstances of how the marriage had ended. My name I kept, Calloway, not as any remnant of him, because it had never belonged to that marriage in any meaningful sense. It was the name on the patent, the name on 36 years of published clinical work, the name on a research paper currently under review at a journal in my field. It was mine before him, and it remained mine after, and keeping it required no explanation to anyone. The documents were brought out in sequence. Garrett's attorney placed each one before him and indicated where his signature was required. Garrett read each page before signing. I will give him that. He read carefully, perhaps more carefully than he had read anything in a long time. He did not look at me, not when he sat down, not when the first document was placed in front of him, not during any of the pages that followed, not when his attorney gathered the completed file and nodded across the table at Audrey. Not once, during the entire length of that proceeding, did Garrett Winslow's eyes meet mine. He looked at the documents. He looked at the wall behind my head. He looked at the edge of the table and his own hands and the court reporter in the corner. He looked at everything in that room except the 62-year-old woman sitting across from him. The woman he had looked at and seen a target. The woman whose age and health history he had calculated into a plan. The woman who had been paying attention when he assumed she was not. I noted it the way I had noted everything for the past 8 months. Precisely, without editorializing. A fact about a person, a final entry. When the last page was signed, he stood. His hands moved to his jacket buttons with the automatic precision of deep habit, fastening them from bottom to top the way he had done thousands of times before. The muscle memory of a performed self continuing to operate after everything that had animated it was gone. He picked up his bag. His attorney said something brief. Garrett nodded. He walked out of the room. The door closed behind him. The sound it made was very small, completely ordinary, entirely final. Audrey organized the signed documents into their folders without rushing. Theodore confirmed through the phone that he would have the patent documentation updated and filed within the week. The court reporter packed her equipment with the quiet efficiency of someone who has witnessed many endings and understands that her job is to record them accurately, not to respond to them. I sat alone in the room for a few minutes after everyone had gone. No strategy running, no language being managed or monitored, no calculation of how my face should look when a man handed me something I already knew was poisoned. No counting of steps across a kitchen floor or measuring of distance between a vitamin bottle and the edge of a shelf. Just a room, a table, a folder of signed documents, the air conditioning still running, still too cold. I picked up the folder, I put on my coat. I walked out into Nashville in July, which hits you like a physical thing when you push through a glass door from an air-conditioned interior. Heat and brightness, and the city going about its Wednesday afternoon with complete indifference to what had just happened inside one of its buildings. My phone buzzed. A message from Priscilla. One word with a question mark. I typed back 3 words. It is done. I walked to my car. I sat for a moment with my hands in my lap and the folder on the passenger seat and the engine not yet started. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be precise about that, because I think the triumphant version of this story would be a dishonest one. What I felt was quieter than triumph and more lasting. The particular sensation of having carried something very heavy for a very long time and having finally, completely set it down. I started the car. I drove. I came back to Vanderbilt on a Monday morning in October 2025. Same parking garage, level 3. Same walk across the covered bridge into the main building. Same smell of antiseptic and recycled air that I had been breathing for 36 years and had missed more than I expected during the 90 days away. Priscilla was at the pharmacy counter when I walked in. She looked up, looked at me the way she had been looking at me for months, reading whatever she needed to read, and then she went back to what she was doing. No announcement, no ceremony. Just the 2 of us in the same space again, which was exactly right. My first case that morning was a medication adjustment for a patient with serious kidney disease on a complex antibiotic regimen. The kind of case that requires you to be fully present, where the margin between helpful and harmful is narrow enough that your attention cannot be anywhere else. I was fully present. It felt like coming back to a language I had always known but had not spoken for a while. Natural, immediate, mine. In the afternoon, I stood in the pharmacy lab, reviewing an analysis result with one of the younger technicians. He asked me what I was looking for in the readout. I told him I was checking whether the result was saying accurately what it needed to say. He nodded and made a note and moved on to the next task. I stayed with the result a moment longer. Outside the window at the end of the hallway, Nashville in October had the kind of afternoon light that does not announce itself. Low and amber and unhurried, the light of a city moving through an ordinary day. I stood at that window for a little while before I went back to work. It asked nothing of me. I asked nothing of it. That felt, after everything, exactly like enough. There is something I want to say before I go, and I want to say it simply because simple is the right register for it. Betrayal does not arrive all at once. It comes in increments, in a tablet placed beside a glass of water, in a laugh heard through a door, in a language spoken freely in a house where someone assumed they were not understood. What saved me was not luck. It was 36 years of learning to pay attention to the things that do not announce themselves. The signal that lives between the data points. The question you ask, not because you expect a certain answer, but because the answer, whatever it turns out to be, is something you need to know. He looked at a 62-year-old woman, and he saw what he needed to see. He forgot to look at what was actually there. I do not know what you are carrying right now, or what it is in your life that is asking you to look more closely than you have been looking. But I know this. You are more capable of that looking than you believe you are. Age does not diminish that. If anything, it sharpens it. The most important things I have ever understood, I understood quietly, in a hallway, in a parking garage, at a kitchen counter with my hands flat on cold granite. Pay attention to those moments. They are telling you something. I am Nora Calloway. I am 62 years old and I am still standing.